We are ready to start. Guests, colleagues, partners, citizens, and all stakeholders, really from various sectors who have joined us this morning. I greet you all. On behalf of Future Cities Africa and the Municipal Edge, welcome to our third webinar of the 5th Annual Local Government Conversations as we continue to drive conversations for impact, which is a theme that we adopted for 2026. That's a great milestone then, given that we are in our 5th year. And my gratitude also goes to both our teams from Future Cities Africa and the Municipal Edge. The past 4 years have delivered new knowledge for some in each of our webinars, be it in the audience, be it among the panelists themselves, because we often get that feedback that even the panelists, they do learn from each other. Let's continue to be a solution-driven and the knowledge exchange medium that we have positioned ourselves to be. My name is Zolani, and the surname is Zonyane, the curator and the moderator of this webinar series. Also, our sincere appreciation goes to our platinum sponsor, Business Engineering, and our gold sponsor, NDISO Consulting Group. And we are joined this morning by Mr. Oleni from NDISO Consulting. We appreciate the continued support and ensuring that we deliver these webinars at no cost to our audience, but I always say, we can say these webinars are free, but someone is footing the cost. Talking about the audience, you made a call that it will be great for you to actually accumulate CPD points, which is continuing professional development, for spending up to 2 hours of your time with us in these webinars. We have entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Chartered Institute of Government Finance, Audit and Risk Officers to ensure that for your attendance, you earn up to a maximum of 2 CPD points for joining this webinar and many other webinars that are still coming. To get your certificates, ladies and gentlemen, you can reach out to SIGFARO via CPD for continuing professional development, CPD at sigfaro.co.za. Let me repeat, to get your certificates, you can get them from SIGFARO via CPD at sigfaro.co.za. That email will be responded to with your certificates. As always, to our audience, our chat box is open. Our Q&A option is also open for your questions that you might have for your contributions. But as we do so, let us know where you are joining us from so that we can be able to have an understanding of who is in the room. And of course, we've got our partners and supporters who have committed to contributing to a better local government, as we'll be discussing today as well, in the South African Local Government Association, the Center for Municipal Asset Management, the Institute for Local Government Management, and the Institute of Municipal Personnel Practitioners of Southern Africa. We appreciate that support in ensuring that as we continue to shape our local government, we do it collaboratively so that we can then get the maximum benefit specifically for our audience, specifically for those who are keen to learn, for those who are keen to exchange the knowledge. Today we've got our 4 panelists who will be sharing, exchanging the knowledge and the best practices on local government. And let's welcome Jean-Pierre Rossouw, the Chief Audit Executive of George Local Municipality. JP, can you greet our audience?
Good morning, Program Director. Greetings to all attendees, fellow panelists, and especially our delegates attending this session. Thank you also to Future South Africa and Municipal Edge for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion and as part of this webinar. And I'm looking forward to participating, and it's really an honor and a privilege to be part of it. Thank you, Zlani.
Thanks a lot. Secondly, we've got Mielani Oleni, who is the Group Chief Advisor at Ndiso Consulting. Welcome, Klegazwam. Can you greet our audience?
Yeah, good morning, Mhlegazi. Good morning to all the participants, and to say thank you to Future Cities and the Municipal Edge, Sigfaro, and Business Engineering. I think from a Ndiso Consulting point of view, we are very pleased to be part of this groundbreaking knowledge sharing, capacity building webinars. And we look forward to the conversation today and hope everyone will be able to participate and share their insights. Thank you.
Wonderful. We also have Sylvia Nasambu. Sylvia is the head of Secretariat from the Kenya Senate Standing Committee on Devolution and Intergovernmental Relations. Sylvia, welcome and thanks for joining us this morning. Can you greet our audience?
Good morning to everyone. Greetings from Kenya. It's my pleasure to be part of this esteemed panel. My name is Sylvia Nasambu. I'm a Kenyan. I work in the Kenyan Senate, specifically as a legislative assistant in the Office of the Speaker. And also I had the Secretariat of the Senate Standing Committee on Devolution and Intergovernmental Relations. And I really look forward not only to sharing the Kenyan experience, but also learning what I can from all our panelists and our participants. Thank you.
To all the 140 of us who have joined this webinar this morning, once more, welcome to our audience. As I've indicated, we look forward to your intriguing questions, your comments, because what we also say in these webinars, it's not only about the questions. We've got a number of experts within the audience who also should be able to provide some insights, some inputs to the conversations themselves. We do welcome those. Without really wasting time, JP, let me hand over to you as you begin basically to outline for the purpose of setting the basis for our conversation, just touching on structural and governance architecture within South Africa, but beyond that, the best practices that then emanate from such structural and governance architecture. Your 20 minutes start now, and over to you.
Thank you, John. Just sharing my screen for presentation. I will stick to my 20 minutes to allow sufficient time for discussion afterwards. So Zlan, just a background. Thank you again for the opportunity. I think from my side, setting the scene for the first 20 minutes and to allow the other panelists to share their experience as well. And for the last hour to allow just for an open discussion with our delegates as well. As you know, that local governments across the world are increasingly under pressure to deliver sufficient services, be sustainable, and so forth. And this all these pressures are being pushed on local government while navigating fiscal constraints, urbanization, rising citizen expectations, and so forth. And not only in the world itself, in South Africa, we are also confronting with these challenges. In terms of fiscal sustainability, especially with the sort of a negative outlook of the economy at this stage as well. So we need to find a way now to balance around these elements. And I think these kind of platforms of knowledge sharing is key in sharing lessons and best practices and so forth to build the governance capacity and the infrastructure delivery and accountability that is needed. So at the same time, I think many countries and cities globally have implemented various reforms, innovative reforms that have strengthened our government systems to be able to respond to the needs of our citizens. Because I think, although, for example, the private sector, you can be in the business of doing certain work, but in our case, we are in the business of delivering services, and that should be in the forefront of how we proceed going forward. So the purpose of my thing just to set the scene for the discussion going forward. For example, first to explore the opportunity of how in South Africa the structural and governance architect are laid out, and to explore the opportunity for when this structure is done properly, that it leads to positive outcomes and drives outcomes from a South African perspective. And I'll touch on a few case studies and global best practices within the presentation, just as a scene setting. And then very close to my heart, discussion I recently had with one of my colleagues is for the local government to identify those mission critical objectives. And with that, MCOs it is those objectives that, if identified and if they should fail, would materially impair or impact on the ability of the municipality to deliver on its mandate. So therefore, for us to ensure that we identify and we do realize the existence of the structural and architecture within local government, is to identify those kind of elements and see how we can identify what are those mission critical objectives. And it should be clear, strategically clear, to align to our mandate. Also should be linked to risk management. So risk is very part of this in terms of having those identified, measured impact and likelihood and so forth. So it's integrated into the process, and then ultimately having these some sort of measured through disciplined and specific smart performance scorecards in terms of it. So that's just the purpose of the setting the scene from where we want to go and how this session will be driven going forward. So the conversation around the government globally, I've recently attended a webinar conference on corporate governance, also attended from various African countries, and as I pick it up, it's moving, shifting. It's the approach of the conversation of municipalities now government shifting from the structures-based outcomes to a more outcomes-based, with that meaning the value that's being received on citizens on the ground and the interest of public as well. So I think for me, the question is no longer whether the governance forums exist. There is a lot we know about them. It's very good documents, but whether they work is actually where we want to go with this presentation and discussion going forward. So we will be focusing on the governance architecture. What is it, or what we deem to be it? But actually, we want to translate this into real outcomes using both the global benchmarks as well as South African approach that we need to deem in terms of it. So governance structure or the architecture in South Africa is different. This presentation is more focused on a local government space, the municipal space. We have these governance structures. You have your council, which is ultimately your executive authority. They have certain committees, Section 79 committees that reports directly to council and to inform council on certain elements. And then you have your executive mayoral system, where they also have certain committees, which and such called the 680 committees, which advise the mayor in terms of certain elements, which ultimately feeds back to council, who's the ultimate governing body within the local government sphere. And then you have the administration part, which is normally headed by an accounting officer, city manager, or municipal manager. Depending on the wording of ultimately, it means that the accounting officer is responsible for the administration side of the structure. The other part of the architecture in terms of government is the processes, the systems, how it operates under the administration in terms of policies in place, the controls, reporting lines, and so forth. And then even another sphere, there's still it's very topic that is close to my heart is combined assurance, or what we call integrated assurance. Is how do we ensure that the structures above us, from an internal perspective, external audit, risk management, oversight, your compliance, your governance processes, how are these integrated, and to ensure that the whole GRC, the governance risk compliance portfolio, are integrated and an approach to advise the governance structures to make informed decision making. So we know the architecture are there, but in this is that for me, is the governance is almost like the engine room of municipal performance. So if the structure is correct and everything's working according to how it's supposed to work, I think then we can move to what we want to achieve in terms of the approach and achieving the value that we want to achieve. What I want to touch on in South Africa, we have a very good system in place in terms of our external audit side of it. We have the Auditor General of South Africa, which is Chapter 9 institution in terms of the Constitution. They, on each platform, also try and bring the wording across about the accountability system, which basically means that everyone has a role and responsibility when we move forward. They're very big on culture as a model block of it, linking on it is your performance, your accountability, transparency, and institutional integrity. I'm not going to in detail of it, but I'm saying that there is a kind of a shift driving from an external audit perspective. How can we try and do better as a country? How we can do better as a government institution? How can we do better as a municipality? From performance side is we need to demonstrate what is those lived realities of South Africa. Do they experience the mandate that they need to do in terms of service delivery going forward without causing public harm? And I think from the new global internal audit standards also has a big interest in public public trust, the public sort of enhancing public value through the processes. And ultimately, if we can deliver these processes, it will ultimately lead to a better life for the citizen on the ground as well. Ultimately, I do believe that what we call in South Africa or clean audits is unqualified audit without any findings. How does this relate to decision on the ground and bringing back to it? Similar to the accountability cycle, is that there needs to be sort of oversight, stakeholders reporting a mandate that could be assist in terms of helping us make their decisions and ensure there's swift accountability and consequence management for where things go wrong. And then obviously transparency will be key in public oversight in terms of ensure that there's timely information, the public is informed, all the stakeholders are informed of it, and then ultimately the institutional integrity, maintaining and behaving ethical. I think all of the corporate governance codes, including the recent King 5 releases, will focus very much on ethical leadership and how to go forward in complying with legislation and acting in the best interest of the organization. This was taken from a presentation done by the Age as well. I'm not going into detail of it, but as you can see displayed now is that everyone has a role to play in the eco accountability system. This is from a South African perspective where we see in the middle, the citizen is always there. There are various role players. You have your mayor speaker who has responsibility, you have your municipal manager, senior manager, the officials trying to do the work on the ground, all of those leading back up until the other structures such as your parliament, parliamentary oversight committees, and therefore, but this speech is over and above just in, nicely concludes in terms of what are those, who are the people that influence decisions, who enforces them, what is the role of the active of the citizen in this ecosystem and inside of it, and who are the leaders, decision makers, and where are the support and oversight over these structures to ensure that for as a whole, as a structure, we do achieve what we want to achieve as a government that is citizen driven and value driven, and not even value creation as per se, but value preservation and continuation, that we keep on doing what we're supposed to do. What they also do in terms of activating the system, they use, or the Auditor General indicating the power of 5, where the first one is the reporting side of it. So within this structure, the governance structure, the architecture, we have certain responsibilities on our municipal managers and mayors to do the certain in-year reporting, those kind of issues like your 1655 reporting, your monthly budget, annual statement, and so forth. Then in the second line, you have your oversight responsibilities. There is like AGs on that. You have various legislative mechanisms that could be used through COCTA or even the MEC as well. You have the third one, the indicated parliament as well, the legislator setting the the tone of it in terms of reporting to it, also providing monitoring it. But it is as you can say, from time to demonstrate is that so trying to activate the accounting system, it is we need enhanced support and oversight, which will have a positive impact on service delivery going forward. At George, we've been as an example or case study, we've been privileged enough to receive what they call unqualified audits or clean audits for the past 5 years, and it's not a small feature to actually. One thing is attaining it, but the other thing is maintaining it, ensuring it remain there where our statements are clean, where there be no material findings on compliance legislation, no material findings on performance reporting, and this actually just brings back to the word that we need to heed the call for action when it's needed. And from our side, we just look at the few best practices. From the AG side, is we do focus on accountability as a starting point. There is transparency, institutional management, starting with the implementation of consequence management, linking back to accountability, embedding good governance practices. As I said, there is a whole lot of frameworks out there that could be used. So African-based, you have a King 5-4 code, which is also internationally recognized as a good practice. Again, embedding the combined insurance, integrated insurance models, being proactive. And I think as we go along, clear honest discussion, clear engagement is what needed in terms of how we go forward in this. But we do on a continuous basis need to implement the recommendations. There need to be in-year monitoring, professional mindset, and both professional mindset. I mean that the government has a clear approach also to try and professionalize the state. So trying to be in line with them, being the minimum requirements, having those competent staff in place is key to it. And then obviously we can't be stagnant. We need to strive towards continuous improvement, and innovation is one of the parts there where we can definitely as a country leverage on in terms of that. As I said, I'm going to touch briefly on the governance. There is various frameworks, starting with the corporate governance ones. We know we have a legislative part of it, but there's also guidance for council, board, oversight in terms of value, your king codes. There's frameworks on data governance. IT governance is becoming a big thing now in terms of moving towards new systems and so forth. And then obviously artificial intelligence is also one thing that we need to start exploring and try regulating in terms of how we use this ethically, transparently, and securely when we deploy architecture. But as you can see, Zolani, the architecture of Africa is already set there in terms of how to ensure good public governance, ensuring public interest, and there is just a schematic indication of how we can see that we need to stay on our mission. What is our mandate, democratically and legitimately, in terms of what are those structural and governance arrangements in place, relationship with management, the policy and policy alignment. We are currently, as a local government, in the space where we just adopted our strategic plan, which we call IDP, Integrated Development Plan, and our budgets. We now open for public participation. So just at the open communication, and we do employ all of our colleagues and people on the ground do take part of it, so that they are informed when we are start delivering on these mandates and we're delivering on our promises that we want to do. Sort of in the strategic planning process in the block 2, there is risk management, which should be, I think, be part of the entire process to support and inform decision making when we do risk-based decision processes. And the last 2 blocks is deal with people, the capacity of people, the leaders, the tone at the top, leaders. There's also saying that when mommy and daddy fight, there's always issues in the house. So we need to have a skill set, and that correlation between the political side and the administrative side should always be carefully managed within a responsible manner and ethical behavior, and appointments being made that are truly competent and qualified. And then we have a collaboration for outcomes throughout the year in terms of citizenship engagement, reporting performance, and then sort of trying to measure the impact that we have. So I'm not going to delay the point. And from a South African structure point of view, we have our council, we have executive, We have that MMN's director team. We have assurance layers that links through all of these structures, and then the citizen stakeholders all about what's, as it's Africa is one of the most well-defined governance frameworks globally, but the challenge is somehow on the execution phase where we have issues. So moving from structure to outcome, I'm almost done. Just about 4 minutes left on my side as well. Just stick to time for oversight purposes. We do have a governance structure. We should have a governance structure. We should have effective oversight, should have accountability, should have certain outcomes, and ultimately we should deliver value or impact. For example, in my space as an auditor, if you have a strong audit committee, it will definitely lead to better financial reporting, independent internal audit is there, early risk identification, which might eventually, if we move from structured-based to outcome-based, there also be fewer self-delivery failures and a more proactive self-delivery approach going forward. I had a few slides on mission critical objectives. I only do one or two. If we identify the objective up front, there should be a risk link to it, and ultimately performance management afterwards. I think this presentation will be shared with the team so they can do it in just have a look at it in what was what's indicated here as well. For example, if you want to be sustainable financially, have clean governance, there needs to be a process that comes along with it. So identifying what are those critical objectives. I've listed 7 examples there, but for due to time, I don't go through every one of them. But we know water, sanitation, those are key basic services that we need to look at it. So, but if you want to do that as a focus area as a government, we need to realize what is the risk involved in terms of and how do we measure performance management from a finance perspective, internal policy perspective, as well as the community perspective as well. So there's 7 in terms of the sustainable growth, economic development stimulation, ethical leadership, climate resilience, and then digital transformation, which is key. I think digital or IT should be actually number 1 on the process in terms of how do we identify what will impact us if it should realize what will bring us to a standstill. I'm going to skip this slide. So I'm just going to start with one of the best practices. And now we do the Institute of Internal Auditors recently also went out to a complete overview of their standards. So while many organizations aspire to this global best practice, George has been able to demonstrate full conformance with the global internal audit standards as well. So it is there. The standards, the processes are there. It's just how do we bring it back to us, and it should not be theoretical in nature. We as a case study just demonstrate it can happen. We can. It is achievable within South African context. So recently we received our rating. We received a fully conformance rating for the global internal audit standards, which meaning there is international best practice out there that can be used for South African purposes, in ensuring that we are alignment. And there's a whole lot of standards. I just quickly screenshotted some of those areas, and for all of them we managed to receive full conformance rating. So it is possible going forward. So full conformance is not a passing assessment. It reflects a mature governance environment where internal audit is seen as a strategic partner. Just going a bit quicker in terms of time, Zolani. So what our processes were being embedded within our architecture. So internal audit was embedded. We do have what they call the sheet at the table. We strengthened audit oversight. We adopted integrated assurance practices. And this all, the impact of enhanced with credibility with our stakeholders, improved outcomes, ensure a better risk visibility for management and council, and strengthen the overall governance maturity of the entire architecture of it. So what we can do, what we differently at George's, we treat our assurance functions, which is internal audit, external audit management, as strategic governance partners within the architecture of government. Our planning is deeply risk-driven and forward-looking. We apply a structured end-to-end methodology. We measure on performance honestly. We embrace technology and the practical use of technology. We also actively use artificial intelligence, AI, as well in our responsible manager, but we do keep it practical, clear, and value. So the difference lies with us not having a lot more documents at brow, but we deliberately implement and apply them going forward. There is 2 case studies I'm not going to touch on. I'm going to leave that maybe to the colleagues to go forward. But in the presentation that you could share afterwards, there's a good one on Estonia in terms of how they transform digitally and innovatively, as well as the UK itself. We do also have some mere releases from internal audit. We want to go in terms of it is possible that you can implement these global best practices as well. The Estonian one is fine. The key lesson there is that we do not treat digital transformation is not IT project. It must be seen something that is an enabler towards good governance, similar to the one on UK, the reform, strengthening the accountability cycle. Strong independent assurance is critical to ensure a sustainable local government. So in my closing remark, Zolana, I think I went 1 minute over time here. So if governance architecture is the foundation, and we know what it is, and we can explain on it, then a leadership, innovation, and intergovernmental collaboration are the multipliers. And with that being said, now I think I look forward to the discussion that will follow after this. Is that we do have these structures in place, you know how they work. There is backpacks in place, and it is possible that we as a country can actually leverage on these, and even our own processes as Africa, also just knowledge sharing with the rest of our continent, so that we'll be all on the same page and we can leverage and use it. There will never be one fit all process, but I think from that is, I think if you use this as foundation, and complement with the leadership, innovation, and the intergovernmental collaboration, we can multiply and we can achieve public interest and public value at the end of it. So, and I think that's all from my side in terms of presentation, setting the scene, and hopefully other colleagues will follow and pick up on it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, JP, for those inputs. And I believe to all the 190 of us who are in this webinar, we continue to draw the lessons from the municipalities like George. And again, to our audience, we've got quite a good mix from municipalities. We've got our metros. I've seen quite a delegation from the city of Cape Town, city of Tshwane, among others. We've got our district municipalities, our local municipalities, national and provincial departments. I've seen some colleagues from those two spheres as well. And again, our partners, specifically, I've seen private sector colleagues who are involved in local government, civil society, academia, normal citizens. We appreciate the fact that you have joined this conversation. Now, Mielani, let me bring you in as we still shape this conversation for the purpose of ensuring that we do outline the baseline and the basis for the conversation that we are having this morning. Based on JP's inputs, your experience within local government broadly, but specifically around governance and leadership successes in managing local government. What can you augment and add in the presentation that JP has tabled? Welcome, Mhlekazwam. Over to you.
Yeah, so good morning and thank you very much, Mhlekazwam, and thank you to JP for the strong opening in outlining the conversation that we are going to have within this 2 hours. I put up this slide deliberately because if we look at, how we want to move as countries, as a continent, not only as South Africa, but, as a continent with regards to how we want to change our lot, is literally to move from the picture which is on the left-hand side to move to the picture which is on the right-hand side. And why do we say this? We've already spoken about the case, that Africa has got, our mainly African countries have got challenges where we need to be able to create development. And this should be speaking to the mandate which you, JP, aptly touched on. The mandate of local government, before we've even touched, other matters, is to deliver services. And obviously the structures that were outlined are a vehicle for us to be able to organize all of the human resources, financial resources, infrastructure, and all those things to be able to deliver the services. So the point is vividly is before we get lost, in the structures, before we get lost in the politics, before we get lost, in all the various things that, drive local government. The essence of it is for us to be able to deliver services. And if we're not organized adequately, sufficiently to be able to deliver those services, it means that we're going to continuously fail the communities. Of course, comes in various, inputs that we must consider, and notwithstanding within the local space in South Africa, we have spoken previously about, in fact, currently about fiscal consolidation, but there's also about, fiscal, devolution of powers and so on. So what we are seeing as well, if I may make a comment to open up, the conversation, is the subject of consolidation fiscally as well as devolution is one that needs to be approached with a lot of care, because what we currently have within our local municipalities that may sometimes provide shortcomings is the fact that you have the functions and the powers which are located at a local government level, but not necessarily the financial resources to be able to support the delivery or the carrying out of those functions. And that is where perhaps we need to be looking at, if we start looking at comparisons and benchmarks. So is it consolidation? Is it devolution of powers that we should be following? Or is there a balance, somewhere in between? And I think the answer is that there is a balance, somewhere in between. The next issue, which I'm going to then touch on, is specifically because, the structures were mentioned. And it's not to rehash, what the structures are, but it's just to pictorially represent, what JP has spoken about, when I go specifically into the core mandate of the local government, across the world, not only in a South African setting or Kenyan setting or only Zimbabwe, but across the continent. I think our core issue is to be able to utilize the structures that are in place, to be able to make sure that we integrate the city and can manage the cities or the local areas effectively and be able to give at least services that are of a high quality, sustainably so, for the population, because that is what the population is facing whenever they deal with lack of service delivery, when they deal with requirements of water, of electricity, of dealing with other things such as potholes or derelict, not picking up of waste. So the first thing is to be able to appreciate that there is a city management mandate that must be put in place. Secondly, the management of water and energy, which are the core drivers and incidentally the revenue drivers for those municipalities. Added to that, perhaps the property taxes, depending where you are. Also the management of the transportation or movement of goods. You need a very strong transport mechanism that it will be able to deliver roads that are easy to drive on, roads that you can move on. And then the other mandates that have fallen in some cases on local government but are shared with other spheres of government, the social services, but more the public safety, also shared across the board. The other part, is sometimes, the softer side, which is the recreation facilities. And then the biggest one is the city development. So I think the structures of local government, insofar as we can compare them across the board, we also have a very interesting situation where we have within the local government sphere, we have effectively three spheres, because we have the category A, which would be the cities, the category B, which would be the locals, and we also have the districts as well, which are perhaps some of the municipalities that manage the district areas with different functions. So I think the contributions to put forward is that we ought to look at these structures vis-a-vis the fact that whenever you have a structure, you require people, and you require people who are highly skilled to be able to populate each one of the different areas. JP spoke about the risk, elements. If you don't have the right, people in the right places with the right skills, with the right experience, you can incidentally start to cause, risks because of poor performance from the people who are not necessarily in the right places or well qualified for those areas. The other perhaps, point I want to just put forward is what we call the long-term, the resilience strategy hierarchy. We emphasize more at times, capacity, and we don't take back, the fact that before you have capacity, you need to focus on capability. And in this case, the local government space, more than any other sphere of government, yes, notwithstanding the fact that the national has to set, policies, and if you have a provincial or a county system, you also ought to have, very strong technocrats that are going to play a governance role within those particular areas. But the local government is that sphere of government which, in a way, you can look at it as an enterprise within government. It's a business within the sphere of government because it must have multidisciplinary capabilities to be able to summon the resources and deliver services ultimately. And that is often the challenge that we see because we don't understand or focus on the issue of capability. And according to the Australian Public Service, capability is three things. Number one, leadership, which means from a political leadership in a system where there's politicians or councillors. Secondly is the strategy. In our case, we may talk about the IDPs, we may talk about the SDPIPs, which is, the Integrated Development Plan, which is a 5-year plan of how municipalities should be developing. And critical within there is that, some of those IDPs at times, may not reflect, the development and may not be aligning to where the national development plan is going. So that is a core area that we need to be looking at, in terms of how do you set, a IDP or a strategy that allows an area to grow in such a way that it contributes to service delivery, first and foremost for local government. The particular municipality is sustainable in all aspects of revenue, of attracting skills, of delivering future projects and future growth and so on. Then the last issue, which I think is the core of what I've been talking about, is the service delivery. So if you have capability and people who are capable, it means that they'll be able to lead, they'll be able to devise strategies, and also to devise operating models that are going to deliver services ultimately to the population. So my contribution is exactly that. Of course, wrapped around all of this are the various, accountability structures. But if we can at least understand that capability leads to then us being able to look for capacity or to grow capacity from there on. From the capacity that we have, we go to the stage which is called anticipation, where we are able to plan ahead of disasters. We are able to plan ahead of some of the needs. We are able to plan ahead and anticipate how the development, and rather be running according to a plan than to be reactive. And then the other aspects is, the aspects of adaptation, of easy recovery should there be disasters, as well as sustainable development, green growth, and so on. I'm not going to touch on those ones. But core to what I just wanted to contribute is that the structures within local government must be able to enable the delivery of services by building strong capabilities within those municipalities. In some of the cases, we've spoken about sharing of resources between the district and the municipalities, or even the best practice from the cities to the locals, or even the twinning models that we look at international cities that have developed, way beyond us, or have been in the business of running local government and are showing successes despite, having different models. So from my contributions, I think the last point I'll make is that, of course, we ought to be thinking about demarcation issues, because some of our municipalities or counties or whatever the case may be, if they are not demarcated such that they have a strong economic base, it is often a recipe that would cause instability and would cause that particular municipality to be dependent on the fiscus for support, and therefore the devolution that perhaps would be required of powers and functions as well as financial resources may amount to poor success for that particular municipality. But the point of it is that whether we devolve, whether we consolidate, we ought to be looking at what the capabilities are that we require and be able to source those capabilities, and in some cases be open-minded that there is not only government that can only provide these services, but to look beyond government, to look at your DFIs, to look at other organs of states, but also to look into the private sector. We have, for instance, banks who bank all municipalities who also sit with some capabilities that they can deploy. We also have consulting companies, engineering companies, and so on and so forth. So really, the ecosystem that was shown earlier in terms of accountability, we ought to be drawing an ecosystem that says, how do we then create capability? We perhaps need to draw up a capability ecosystem for local government. I think I'll pause there and allow for further conversations to take place.
Thanks a lot, Mhlekazwam, for that contribution. And most importantly, the last point you are touching on, given where we are as a country, talking about decentralization, devolution, with the current evolution of the white paper on local government. I believe we really have a task ahead of us in ensuring that the devolution, decentralization is also supported by the capability you spoke about, the skills, but most importantly, the strong leadership. As we welcome Sylvia, as I've indicated earlier on, she is the head of the Secretariat within the Kenya Senate Standing Committee on Devolution and Intergovernmental Relations. Sylvia will be sharing with us because Kenya itself has undergone a devolution process. Then based on that experience, as I've just indicated, that as South Africa, we are at that moment which will redefine our local government. And also one of the critical aspects, Sylvia, is the fiscal decentralization conversation, the devolution of powers and functions from national and provincial to local governments. And again, from the experience of Kenya, having undergone this process, it will be great just to get insights from what has worked, what has not worked, and how best as this collective, how best as we engage this morning, how can we draw lessons, successes from the process of Kenya itself. Welcome, Sylvia, and over to you.
Thank you, Zolani. So I'll take us through the Kenyan experience. I don't have an elaborate presentation, but I'll share my notes after this session. So from an introductory standpoint, following the promulgation of the Constitution of Kenya in 2010, decentralized governance was introduced through the advent of devolution. Devolution in Kenya is a two-tier system made up of two levels of government, namely national and county governments. This system of governance is structured such that the territory of Kenya is divided into 47 counties. And as a result, the Parliament of Kenya also became a bicameral house, with the National Assembly focusing on national government matters and embodying the power of the purse, that is, they run our budgetary process, and the Senate focuses on the counties and all matters devolution. Devolution in Kenya also resulted in transfer of powers, functions, and resources from the national to the 47 county governments, and heavily promotes citizen participation and equitable development across the nation. It's important to note that the governments at the national and county levels are distinct yet interdependent and conduct their mutual relations on the basis of consultation and cooperation as prescribed by our Constitution and the law. Our fourth schedule in the Constitution also contains a comprehensive list of all functions carried out by the national government, such as policy development, manning of national referral hospitals, and for county governments, functions such as manning county roads and agricultural activities, among others. We also, because of the distinct yet interdependent nature of the operations between national and county governments, the laws of Kenya do allow for transfer of functions between both levels of government in instances where one level of government can perform the function more effectively than the transferring level, and where such transfer is not prohibited by law. An example of this is recently the national government transferred the manning of the Masai Mara National Park to the Narok County, which is a really good way of enhancing devolution. And this transfer was done because Narok County proved that they could man the national park by putting in place relevant planning and laws that would capacitate them to man the national park. So within the Kenyan experience, the structure and hierarchy of local governments is such that the major decentralized unit is the 47 counties, which are headed by a governor who is the equivalent to our head of state, our president, and who leads county governments, which are also known as county executives. The executive has a cabinet. They're called county executive members, and they also mirror the ministers on the national level, and they cover various sectors within the county. Counties are also split into wards, and they have ward representatives who basically mirror our national legislature. And they are members of county assemblies who carry out legislative and oversight mandates within the counties. Counties are then further decentralized into urban areas and cities, sub-counties, wards, village units, and the law provides that a county government can increase such units as it may determine. However, the major unit in terms of fiscal decentralization, in terms of collection of revenue and general governance is the county government. And from my little research, I believe the main difference between the South African model and the Kenyan model is that the South African model has 3 tiers, while the Kenyan system only has 2 tiers. So in terms of fiscal decentralization within the Kenyan setting, counties are autonomous and therefore come up with their own budgets and allocations, and they have their own budgetary cycles, with the county executive drawing the budget through the county treasury and the county assembly approving these budgets. This process greatly mirrors the national budgetary cycle, while also being greatly dependent on Parliament, specifically the Senate, to determine the allocation to the counties. Counties also receive revenue from the sources that I'm about to list. The first being the equitable share, which is a portion of nationally raised revenue that must be divided between the national government and 47 counties each financial year. And this is the biggest source of revenue for county governments in Kenya. The next source is on-source revenue, which is money that a county government raises by itself from various sources, which include taxes, fees, charges, facilities improvement financing, and appropriation in aid. County governments also get revenue from conditional grants. County governments can also take loans from external resources or private lenders. They are also allowed to get donor funding. And county governments can also carry out investments, and receive returns on profits from undertaking these investments. Now, in consideration of what I would view as a data-driven approach and prudent fiscal planning at the county level, a county must have a county integrated development plan, which is a 5-year master plan that guides all development in the county. This plan contains information on development priorities that inform the annual budget process, particularly the preparation of annual development plans, the annual county fiscal strategy papers, and the annual budget estimates. This plan is crucial in securing funding for a county's activities because the law requires that no public funds can be appropriated by a county without this planning framework. It is the critical first stage of the budgetary cycle within a county, and it aims to coordinate the work of both levels of government in a coherent plan to improve the quality of life for all people and contribute towards devolution. To ensure transparency, accountability, and inclusivity in coming up with this county integrated development plan, public participation and engagement of non-state actors must be undertaken. This plan coordinates all efforts at county level and brings together economic, social, environmental, legal, and spatial aspects to meet local needs. Now, what does this plan contain? The plan must have the following aspects within it. First, it must have a legal and policy background, including constitutional and legal basis for county planning and linkages to national plans like Vision 2030, SDGs, and the African Union Agenda 2060. Secondly, the county overview and the plan must have a county overview and situational analysis, which includes the county profile and covers location, demographics, administrative units, even the climate of the specific county and its economic activities. And it must also have data and statistics on current status of sectors. The plan must also have a spatial framework, a brief spatial framework for implementing projects, and progress on previous county spatial plans. The plan must also have development priorities and strategies. It must contain an implementation framework, including institutional arrangement and roles of different actors on its implementation, resource mobilization and management framework, and assess management risks and mitigation measures. The plan must also have a monitoring and evaluation framework, which includes data collection, analysis, reporting, and learning, and also monitoring and evaluation structure and process during and after implementation of the plan. Must also have a financial plan, which includes the estimated cost of implementing the plan and also considerations on source revenue, grants, development partners, and public and private partnerships. In addition to this plan.
Hi, Sylvia.
Yes.
Maybe as you wrap up, because I believe some of the aspects will also be coming through as we will be having the conversation. And again, looking at how passionate you are, both you and me can agree that it's not the same Sylvia that was concerned before we started the session itself. Maybe in a minute, just to wrap up, and then we will get to the conversations, then you can expand more.
Okay, sorry guys, I've taken up a lot of time. I'll just jump into best practices, which I believe Kenya has achieved. We have digital platforms for collection of revenue, specifically in Nairobi City County, which is the e-citizen platform. Nairobi City County also managed to unify business permits to make it easy for business people to get permits when starting up their business, efficient service delivery. This is a controversial point. It's my own personal view, but I believe us leveraging on collaboration with the national government to ensure infrastructure development and equitable development is achieved across the country has been a game changer. The national government has really channeled in funds to increase the building of stadia, fixing our national trunk roads and even our county roads. And we've even been putting in place affordable housing units, which has been such an amazing development in our nation. On transparency and accountability, we have robust oversight undertaken by Senate committees into the operations and expenditure and audit reports of county governments. We are currently considering amendments to our laws to give our accountability agencies, such as the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, prosecutory powers to make them more effective in discharging their mandate of investigating corruption and economic crimes. We leverage heavily on public participation and access to information. This is such a crucial part of our governance. Everything we do as government must undergo public participation, and there must be access to information to the public to get their buy-in and also to ensure anything we do is not thrown out or rendered null and void by the courts. We also have advancements in accountability, such that the law provides that the public is allowed to petition county governments on any matter, and the county governments have an obligation to respond to these petitions. And lastly, we are putting in place a manner of oversighting on-source revenue, and this is being done by requiring county governments to clearly map out sources of on-source revenue, and also applying automation to ensure that there are no leakages in revenue that comes in. So Kenya has had this wondrous child called evolution for the last 16 years. And this child is no longer a baby, but now a teenager. And like all teenagers, it suffers teenage angst. While it has worked so far, there are still gaps and lacunas that need filling, and best practices that we can adopt from our neighbors and from this experience sharing session. I will say, though, with a lot of Kenyan pride, that since the advent of devolution through our constitution, our supreme law of the land has proven to be resilient, immutable, and unamendable. This greatly comforts me because it assures me that the desire for equitable development across our land is safeguarded and that devolution is here to stay. With those few remarks, I think I'll stop here, and I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discourse. In Kenya, we say asante sana. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thanks for those inputs, and I believe there are quite a number of areas that even in future we might need to explore further beyond this conversation today. And as I've indicated, we are at that point of looking at the white paper on local government, which is basically the master policy, which, among other things, the issue of decentralization and devolution is at the center stage. Talking about that, ladies and gentlemen, please join us next week on Friday, the 24th of April, as we will be hosting our first webinar on the white paper on local government, where we will begin to explore what the 2026 white paper on local government is saying. How is it beginning to reimagine the local government that we want? You will receive that invitation. Please do join us. As I welcome Kudzai, as I've indicated earlier, Kudzai is a director and senior researcher within the Development Governance Institute from Zimbabwe. But Kudzai will focus just on practices within the SADC region in terms of based on your work. What is it that you can share, not only with the panel, but also with the audience? As I hand over to you, let me acknowledge the presence of various representatives from throughout the continent. And let me make a special mention of one who has joined us because for us to have managed to get Sylvia, Director Samuel Njuguna from the Parliament of Kenya is the one who really facilitated that. Welcome. Kudzai, let me hand over to you. Your 10 minutes start now.
Thank you so much, Zolani, and greetings to colleagues in the conference. My presentation, like Zolani has said, will focus on sharing what I consider to be local, national, and international sources of impetus for local government reforms and how we are managing them. So I will use the example of SADC, a few insights from countries that have implemented decentralization processes, and also then finally make comments with respect to what Zimbabwe is trying and what lessons that perhaps identifies or sheds lights on in relation to our conversations as a region and in this conference. The three sources of impetus for local government flow and ebb at different times. And so I will start with the continental impetus that I've located in the national conversation on the Declaration on Decentralization and Local Development, as well as Agenda 2063. Those agendas or policy statements at the African Union level have framed the placement of local governments at the center of delivering to our citizens, to our continental citizens. And they frame also people-centered development. However, implementation across the continent is not necessarily even, both in terms of operationalization of that framework as well as practice on the ground. At national level, most countries in SADC have either in their constitutions, like Zimbabwe, South Africa, Mozambique, and others, have placed the emphasis on decentralization, and they've also made reforms that are inspired by a focus on decentralizing power from national to local level. However, some of the reflections that we've had from literature shows that there's a common pattern across our region and even across Africa and other continents that have tried, or countries in other continents that have tried decentralization. It's the recognition in law, recognition in policy, but implementation which is weak. And there are three areas where that weakness manifests. One is the major elephant that my colleagues that have made presentation at the moment up to now have highlighted. It's fiscal autonomy question. That question is not, Kenya has tried, Kenya is advanced in most respects, but not all other countries in our continent have made fiscal autonomy an important dimension of ensuring local government capacity. The second area of weakness is the performance accountability at the local level. And the last one is about the persistent recurrence of decentralization. So where power would have been devolved, at times you see clawbacks. And it's happened in different sectors, happened in different policy areas or mandates. You end up with mandates that are unfunded, partly because at times, because of the government of a time, they will claw back on certain powers that they have decentralized. So based on that continental and regional experience, what has Zimbabwe tried? What is it doing? And what lessons can it show? I will already make a disclaimer that there are a number of challenges that Zimbabwe in the recent past has been known for, but I focused on what the reforms that is putting in place that are providing possible impetus in our neighborhood, which is South Africa, Botswana, and the rest of SADC, in terms of what we can concentrate on in terms of informing our decentralization and empowerment of local governments. The first one is the constitutionalization of revenue sharing, the minimum 5% of revenue collected being disbursed. And from 2019, Zimbabwe has attempted to do that. In some years, because of fiscal space challenges at national level, the disbursements haven't been made, but at least the claim is constitutional, and therefore it can be litigated if people require to do that. The second area of reform has been defining minimum service delivery standards and making that a statutory mandate and therefore justiciable, so that the residents or citizens can claim a minimum level of service from their local authority. In part, that can also include strengthening the aspect of accountability that is very weak. The third is about integrated performance management in terms of results orientation at local, provincial, as well as national, the three tiers. And that is helping in terms of even the master and local development planning, in terms of specializing the definition of issues that need attention and making sure that attention is given to that. And then the fourth is national urban programs for capacity development of local authorities, which are funded locally, but also funded from international support. And then lastly, ease of doing business reforms. And this has touched issues like licensing, in terms of making sure that investment promotion is made easier, is made more predictable, and is not only attracted at national level, but also it's at local level, in terms of making sure that our local authorities are areas that are attracting, nurturing, and succeeding in terms of providing for investment. These kinds of reforms, which if you were to compare them across the region, could inspire in terms of the neighborhood effect that I was talking about. It could inspire reforms elsewhere. In the context of Zimbabwe, there are certain local authorities that are succeeding in terms of the different areas of reform and even articulating claims on national resource disbursement, so that within that whole framework, you begin to make sure that besides having good structures or clear structures of local governance, you also then make them perform and deliver in an intergovernmental cooperation framework, and making sure that resources are made available. So as I conclude, more of the local government processes in the context of the region, and as well as in Zimbabwe, haven't moved sufficiently from local governments that implement national programs or national projects to local governments that are developmental. So that's the area where we need to look at these local, national, and international impetuses for local government reform and draw lessons and best practices. And South African municipalities can also draw lessons from some of these provisions, but like Sylvia was already sharing with us in terms of the Kenya experience, in terms of the Zimbabwean experience, the lessons that can be learned from the application of those frameworks. It's a work in progress, and a lot needs to be done in terms of learning from and with each other as local governments, because if we don't address the weak performance accountability of local authorities, some of the persistent re-centralization will continue, and is usually justified on the basis that local governments are not performing adequately, and they are not accountable. So some of what JP was saying is very useful in terms of making sure that competency is built within the local authority, so that this whole agenda is not only inspired by national constitutional changes or national policy pronouncements, but also by performance, and making sure that, like, the minimum service standards that Zimbabwe has adopted since last year becomes a basis for citizens to engage horizontally and make sure that we build our local government capacity from below, and ensure that we proceed. I can stop here, and the rest of the conversation can continue later. Thank you, Zolani.
Much appreciated, Kudzai. And again, your submission begins to augment quite a number of points that have come through, specifically on how best we can learn from each other. I've indicated in my opening, you might have a municipality not necessarily the best, but there could be pockets of excellence. And Mielani also touched on the issue of just benchmarking, not only within the country, for an example, as South Africa, but reaching out to other African countries within the region and broadly the continent, in trying to ensure that we do exchange these successes, withdraw lessons from them to ensure that our municipalities become much better in what they do. To the audience, still the questions and answer option is open, but we see not much of the questions, but we did receive some during the registration. We'll touch on that. Which, JP, I want to turn to you specifically on a specific question that came, and I believe it will also assist not only municipalities within South Africa, in terms of how has, for an example, George Municipality integrated internal audit and risk management into the fabric of service delivery. And as you come in, Mr. Oleni, also just maybe applying your thoughts on specifically from a leadership and governance perspective in terms of what distinguishes municipalities that consistently perform well, and then how other local governments within the continent can draw and institutionalize these practices, specifically in driving innovation that came through. Also from JP's presentation, Sylvia, together with Kuzai. JP, please come in just specifically on that particular question. Then I will allow Mhlekazwam on this institutionalization, which many can draw from.
Now, thank you, Zulani, for that question. I think integration of risk and audit should start from the top. It should be done on top, leading that, inviting what we call having a seat at the table, and not only having a seat at the table, but also providing your inputs and views on it. But mostly for when municipalities struggle to implement or get those people around the table, or the value, sometimes the maturity of those functions is sort of a barrier sometimes. So the more mature your risk department, the more mature your internal audit department is, the more value your councils or senior managers can obtain from it. So I think integration should start from the top. I think if you need to have the buy-in from your municipal manager or city manager or the accounting officer in charge to actually bring you in those important discussions. As the previous speakers alluded to, the strategic planning processes that each municipality should have, IDPs or integrated development plans that flows to budgets, that flows through performance plans. Risk management audit should be part of that from the start of it. So I think because service delivery is normally at the end of those processes, when we do spend our budgets on our capital projects and so forth, risk management should be at the start and be involved from the get-go of it. But integrated, sometimes that's maybe more a theoretical response in saying that audit should be there. But I think practically on the ground, integration is still challenging. And I think we can push this maybe through, legislation is also a powerful tool that could be used to force, not force, but at least enhance or encourage participation at the level, so that at least the minimum when you do stretch sessions, there should be a chief risk officer at the table. The chief objective should be there at least, legal services, compliance, bringing all those assurance providers together with the decision makers and to advise them. But I think from practically, if you are mature enough, from a practitioner to practitioner, question answer is that we need to demonstrate that delivery that we can bring to the table and show and demonstrate what value that can actually enhance our processes. So I think in integration, fully integrate your combined assurance approach through council approved policies, executive authority approved policies. In our instance, it's just the council, which after then it needs to be implemented by the administration. So, but from us, we also need to hit the call and not just asking for a seat at the table, but being present during the sessions and being a mature enough department to demonstrate value to all our stakeholders that indeed assurance functions like a risk audit are needed during those discussions to influence the citizens on the ground, identifying the risks that are there. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks a lot, JP. Mielani, as I've indicated earlier on, specifically this institutionalization of governance and leadership based on your experience, based on experience of the ISO broadly, because I know you are involved not only continentally, and I believe such lessons will add quite a value in this particular conversation. Over to Mhlekazo.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great question, because I think the one thing we go back to the structure of how local government vis-a-vis the extent of the devolution or the decentralization, in the South African context, where you have the three spheres of government, as mentioned earlier, is you then have to have a very strong local capability, which is going to be able to lead at the local level. And I think at times, when we talk of local government, it's kind of a misnomer, because, the fact that it's local, we believe that it does not permeate, beyond the local areas. So I think that's firstly the type of leadership that you're looking for within that particular local area is one that has a good grasp of what the population, of what the citizenry within that area is facing, because each one of the areas have got different influences, different, extents of development. And obviously from there needs to be shaping a common development path which can take a municipality beyond. So number one, the fact that there's political leadership and then there's the administrative side. We ought to have a very strong as well as well-qualified political leadership. And I don't mean only with academic qualifications, but I throw them in there as well. But the grasp of understanding how to create development, because the role of the political side is not to go and pick up the picks and shovels and so on, but is to guide and play an oversight role and an accountability role across the board. So you would require, for instance, an executive mayor who has a good grasp of how development from a citywide point of view, how finances work from a citywide point of view, and across the board as the political leadership put together some kind of a small cabinet, which we'll call the mayoral committee. You ought to have then those particular people who will understand transport dynamics, transport, economics, who will understand, finance, who will understand, city development, who will understand the service delivery aspects of it, and economic development, which is often a point that, we miss, because at the local level, we assume that, when the economy grows, it grows at a national level, whereas it grows, from a local level, and it coalesces up to the national level. So the understanding, firstly, from a political point of view, is you need a leadership that is adequately qualified. And then from there on, in terms of the administrative side, this is where you need technocrats. And often, from an accounting officer point of view, you need such a technocrat who can at least be able to manage a lot of moving parts. Because you can imagine, from one day you're dealing with, potholes, the next day you're dealing with street lights, the next day you'll be dealing with having to now create, new landfill site or to township developments and so on. So you need then the technocrats who are going to support the accounting officer to be well versed, in those, areas. And here I emphasize as well the issue of academic qualifications. I emphasize as well the issue of experience. But the ingredient of what we have seen is strength must be there politically, strength must be there administratively. Therefore, the tension between the two tends to be minimized when people know what they are doing, when people understand what their roles are. So each one must be able to then focus on their roles and responsibilities from an oversight point of view. The other one is the understanding that, the administrative side is the one that must drive the day-to-day issues within the municipality, to drive, the customer-centric, issues within the municipality, to put in place, systems that must be driven, within municipalities. So those municipalities, that, have succeeded and succeed, and I think, I'll throw your municipality, JP, is the fact that, you will have that strong political, which is the councillors, and maybe perhaps when they walk into council, somewhat, they will take off, the fact that they are, belong to political parties, and start looking at the municipality as a microcosm of what each one must contribute to. Of course, with the influences of how the politics, which have put them there are. But the common thing is then to then start focusing on what are the core things from an IDP point of view, from an SDPIP point of view. But then the other thing is that those municipalities that also succeed have long-term vision. So the leadership that can have at least a long-term view of where a municipality is going. We can appreciate that 5 years is quite a short time to be able to conceive how development can be done. So you need a 20 to 30-year plan which can be bought, can foster buy-in from across the board, so that even as the changes happen from an administrative and political leadership point of view, that plan should be able to stay the course and guide the course of municipalities. So I think, if we're to succeed, in terms of, the type of leadership, and I want to go back because it seems I have an equation here. So capability is equals to leadership. Then that's the first part, which you were asking. So that leadership must be of a vibrant nature that they would understand, how to then be able to drive, planning for long term, bring it back to medium term, and bring it back to the current, and the understanding that the administrative, and to take away that, unnecessary tension which sometimes builds up, between the two spheres of government, and understand that, it's supposed to be governance, for the municipality, not just politically or administratively, but combining all of those aspects.
That's mouthful, and thanks for those contributions, because it's even better for us as a country looking at all the current developments, and from your submission, adopting the longer term view in planning. It's what will take us out of the quagmire that, for an example, we find ourselves in. Before I allow you to come in, Sylvia, I had the request from Kudzai. He will be stepping off in a minute. I just want to give him just a minute for his closing remarks. And then as he does that, what you can be doing in preparing for your next input is the issue of cooperative governance within Kenya, given the devolution, whether there are any specific challenges, especially given the fact that the counties might feel they've got more power, they no longer need the central government. I'm raising that because, as I've said, it's something that with the white paper in South Africa, it's one of the areas that we'll be looking at. But before then, Kudzai, let me hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Solani, and thank you so much, everyone, in the conversation. It's been a very enlightening, and I've learned a lot from the processes. I live with an emphasis on the horizontal capacity connections that we may need to continue building on, and city to city, local government to local government, moral suasion for performance is what I live with, so that as we strengthen policy delivery and capacity development, I like what my brother Holeni was speaking to in terms of the coordination between policy making and execution. Those are some of the areas where I think a lot needs to be done, and a lot of use of technology, digital approaches, but also long-term planning is very important. And because the poverty is a place and poverty is a cause, so usually the local politics, if it's strong, it is then able to engage the national or even regional politics to make sure that as a region, as a sub-region in Africa, and as Africa as a continent, we're able to utilize the local governments we have as a vehicle for addressing the marginalization we experience and we see regularly, and the challenges in applying the competencies that we have. Because at times we think we don't have the capacity, but it's the application of the capabilities we hold and the institutions that we have created not being operationalized and being accountable. So thank you so much. And as I promised to you, Zolani, I will make comments. I'll take the comments from what is being recorded and adapt the talking notes that I used, that I had shared previously, and finalize and share so that we can keep engaging around the themes that I explored today. Thank you so much. I would not like to miss future events, so please keep me on your database, and I will spread the word locally. Thanks.
And that will be appreciated, and definitely our paths will cross again. Thanks for making time, and enjoy in what's left of today from your side. Sylvia, as I've indicated, in terms of specifically the interrelationship, the cooperative governance between the two spheres given the devolution, the current status in Kenya, but taking that beyond, and you also mentioned something about autonomy, but that's a conversation for another day, because the term autonomy, given the constitutional imperatives on cooperation, interdependencies, intergovernmental relations. It could be a contradiction, but that could be a conversation for the future. Over to you.
Thank you, Zolani. Now, my comments on cooperative governance and intergovernmental relations, the general reception of this is usually negative. In the Kenyan context, most of the citizenry sees that collaboration and cooperation as a clawback on devolution, reducing on the gains of devolution, because in most cases, it's the national government that takes the lead in this cooperation. But from my standpoint, I feel that much as these level of governments are independent, they are still interdependent. They still have to come together to ensure effective service delivery to the people. And even when the budget is being decentralized to the lower level, it has to start at the national level. And the arm of government that gets the lion's share of the budget is the national government. So from time to time, it has to step in the county context. I'll give an example. Like in our previous government, we had a situation where Nairobi City County government had to transfer its functions to the national government. So in that case, the national government had to step in to help with infrastructure development, help with certain service delivery, and what have you. But that situation was very negative because, first of all, the county government complained that they were coerced into that agreement. So that's another negative aspect of decentralization, the power struggle and dynamic between the national and county government. Thereafter, yes, national government stepped in and did those works, but left a hefty pending bill, which the current government is still grappling on how to resolve. So such instances make collaboration and cooperation look negative. But now in this particular session, this particular government, we have yet another situation where the national government and Nairobi City County have signed an intergovernmental cooperation agreement. So everyone is up in arms because they think functions have been transferred again, but that's not the case. In this situation, the county government is still in control, but they're just getting support from the national government. And this support is anchored in law because Nairobi is the capital of Kenya. So it's special, it's different from the other counties. And the law allows for Nairobi to get special consideration. And the upside of this collaboration is Nairobi has gotten an additional 80 billion Kenya shillings injected into their operations. That's a positive. And that will boost Nairobi's service delivery, infrastructure development, among others. So I think the collaboration is good. A lot of people don't. It brings power struggles and budgetary constraints. And yeah, we're still working around it. We're still seeing how it. The counties do their budget without any interference from national government. So in that respect, they are quite autonomous. The only place where national government comes in is when Parliament allocates from the equitable share to the counties. Thereafter, what the counties do with that money is entirely up to them. Yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. No, we'll pick up on these conversations. As I've indicated, we've got quite a lineup of these webinars, specifically the ones on the white paper on local government. And again, if you are able to join us in those, we'll greatly appreciate. There's a comment that came earlier, as I've indicated, within our midst, we've got Director Samuel Njuguna. In responding to that, without really reading the comment, is that Kenya and South Africa, based on the historic context that you have painted, we are more or less in the same space. The issue of spatial planning, because back in the years, many people were displaced. The urban areas then were confined to the few. And it's one of the areas that we are still battling with. We talk about spatial planning, addressing the imbalances of the past, but for one reason or the other, it seems it's still a long journey to get to that point. There's some also comments and questions, JP, in the comment section, which again may be as part of your closing. You might have to touch on one or two of those, but as we also transcend to the closing, I want to pose a question. It's one question which each of you will need to look at, because we talk about digital transformation. We've mentioned data-driven approaches that are shaping local government. And the question that came more on that one was, how are cities in Africa embracing AI as a start and automation when it comes to efficient resource and infrastructure management? And again, I'm raising that question and allowing each of you to reflect on it, because digital transformation is something that we talk about, but vis-a-vis the transformation itself, it's the issue of the technology infrastructure. And again, it would then be great from the side of George Municipality, starting with you, JP. How is the municipality ensuring that that journey continues in ensuring that the municipality serves its communities?
No, thank you. Thanks, John. No, that's, I think, from my view of my understanding, is that innovation is a non-negotiable. I think we need to move with times. I'm not take it back to the 19, but these webinars and stuff like that was not so popular back in the day. But now with the ban on, can't walk and say everything, it moved us into this world, forced us into, like they call it, the fourth industrial revolutions. There's even talks about the fourth industrial revolution, but I think moving with technology will be key at each governance sphere. And in George, we are now we also embrace that technology. We are now on a journey that we are moving away from or building our own system now. So, but with that kind of embracement of technology comes a lot of risks as well. So, and going back to the previous questions about where is risk management, or how do we integrate risk in this? And I think risk should be key of that. And to secure the success of it, I think it's out of just proper planning. There should be a strategic plan in place as to where we go. And for us, it's been a 3 to 5 year journey. We do have a short-term miles, medium-term miles, and long-term miles that needs to go. But I think effective monitoring of this should also be key in terms of, so risk is very key in that, especially in our daily age. As we move with technology, there also the criminal side of it. So there's cyber security attacks, there's cyber risk, IT issues, and so forth. So, but for me, if we look at how we need to embrace automation and AI and so forth, I think it's something we should take on head on, but with due restraint of the risk involved in embracing and taking on these technologies. But from my side, I think innovation in government is a non-negotiable anymore.
Mr. Oleni, your insights and inputs?
From my take in terms of the embracing of or the digital transformation of municipalities, if I go back to the structures that sit within municipalities, is we still have a lot of manual ways of approaching work, and very simple things. I think things that we are seeing is the automation of moving council items to facilitate decision making. So from my point of view, is we need to actually look at the different layers of which way, for instance, the integrated city management, involves a number of moving parts, within there. How do you digitize, the entire process? And in digitizing the entire process, for instance, is to be able to glue together various processes that sit in place. What we have, as I say, is over-reliance at times of warm bodies, but automation should be helping us to tie together how to have even a 24-hour municipality, which you can log in at 12 o'clock at night and be able to pay, or to be able to request a service, to be able to lodge, an application for new services, to lodge a complaint and be able to get, back, the issue there. So I think for us, is we need to look at the critical components of when you manage, an urban area versus, a peri-urban area, vis-a-vis, with rural implications. How do you then set up, that technology to allow even the people who are far away from the services to be able to still access the services? Because that's the role of local government and technology seems to be the processes that can extend beyond. I will give an example with regards to payment, systems. We see a number of payment systems coming up, today, which, are facilitating just sending an SMS to my phone so that I can pick up my statement, I can read my statement, I can understand what I've utilized, and I can perhaps, pay the bill, or I can even query some of, the consumption or the charges that I see on my bill. But that at least facilitates, for someone to be able to pay in case they've not had the time to log into their laptops or to go to the bank, as some people do go to the bank. Some people still rely on going to the municipalities. So you want to cut away the friction that is there from a movement of people and the ability to interact with local government. So for us, is the urban management system is crucial. There are other than back office systems, as you would know, for instance, we have financial systems within municipalities, but those systems must be augmented by input. If you take meter reading, for instance, you want to have a platform that would allow for meter reading to happen even if no one goes and read the meter. I can be able to read my own meter and be able to take a picture, which would give the evidence and the GPS coordinate to match with the location that I am at, to show that that is my household, and be able to submit that particular reading, and that reading should be able to travel throughout the system. And many other systems for credit control, where you need to go and disconnect, but you need to have systems that are within there, and for collection. So that particular platform is one that starts to create customer centricity, and must go further and allow me to, if I want to make changes to my or improvements to my household, to be able to submit online and submit my plans, and those plans perhaps to be reviewed online. Or if I need to go and visit the office, that would be the step that perhaps would be undertaken after my information has been received. So the digitization or the digital transformation of local government is crucial, because that is how you're going to drive access. You're going to cut, the cost of interaction. You are going to reduce the friction of how municipalities, operate. And those systems we can see are being implemented. I think the dangers which I can put forward is where local government or a municipality wakes up and wants to develop its own system from scratch. We've seen, even national departments who are still in development after 30 years of commissioning particular systems. So it's to look at the best of breed and be able to, instead, of wanting to develop, to be able to get, the best of breed and look at, white labeling, look at, customizations, look at, internalization of those systems so that, they are implemented to work for that particular municipality and be able to allow citizenry to interact with municipalities much easier. So I think that digital transformation is a big agenda that should be driven. And I think you can see that we have traditional IT departments. So if you go back to the structure, it means you need to have a chief digitalization officer that now needs to look at, what the future looks like. Whilst you're keeping your emails on, you're keeping whatever on, looking at, how do we then start, bringing technology to be able to run these municipalities better, but with a key role and a small team or a team of people who are going to drive that agenda on behalf of the municipality.
Very insightful and also appreciated. Sylvia, also the same question, but also it will be great, specifically from a Kenyan perspective, the issue of the digital divide, because we can talk about the digital transformation, innovations related to that. But if the very same citizens, for an example, do not have access, which is still a barrier for many communities, what's the perspective from Kenya?
Well, we're still trying to leverage on digital enhancement and service delivery. It's true we do have some areas that do not have access to these platforms, but we're still trying to roll them out in all our counties. The primary user of digital platforms would be our capital, Nairobi City County. I think it's the benchmark that all other counties should aspire to. And other counties also use digital platforms for service delivery, like Nakuru or Mombasa. But we're still behind on that, and we could do more. Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. And ladies and gentlemen, to all the 170 of you who are still with us this morning, we appreciate your time, but as we do, don't forget in actually getting your certificates for CPD points. The email was shared earlier, and what we often do through the emails that will be sharing the recording and other material. We always include the email address for you to be able to claim your CPD points. As we draw closer to the ending of our webinar, as I've indicated, JP, there are some few comments that have come through. Specifically for yourself, based on your experience. It will then be great as we sum up. It could be part of your closing insights and closing remarks. But as we do that as well, it becomes great from the panelists, and it's something that we often do to say, out of the conversation that has taken place this morning, what could be that one thing that you can recommend to municipalities within the African continent that if they start doing that tomorrow, definitely that will then be able to assist in improving the performance. But ultimately, it's always about the services that must be accessed by various communities. As we edge closer to the closing, let's take your closing comments, starting with you, JP, but also just summing up in terms of the inputs as well that have come through. And over to you.
No, thank you, Zlani. I think it has been a privilege to actually be invited to the panel and listen all the good stories and all the lessons learned. And also thank you to the attendees for coming out in numbers to join us for the session. But I think, as I said earlier, we're moving away. The structures are there in governance. So we're moving now to a more outcomes-based sort of approach. So it's value-driven on the ground. So the citizen and the interest of the public is key when we do things. So I think we should continue these conversations and start with this new benchmarking is one word of it, but knowledge sharing is something maybe more preferable, where we can leverage off one another, where we can go ahead. But I think one thing that I would advice to governments is, or municipalities embarking on new processes or trying new instances is proper planning. I think planning is at the start and heart of it for all of it. And then you need to have the necessary buy-in from all the stakeholders, because the previous speaker indicated if you go a new system totally from scratch, it's going to be a long process. But leveraging what's already in place and maybe building it rather than new system, but upgrading and improving going forward. And planning, strategic planning is key to that. And I like the comment made earlier in the comment section about issue about risk management as well. And there's no longer one specific person's responsibility, such as CRO. It should be a combination of all employees being involved and being part of it. And I think the RIMSA report 2055, as Lindy rightfully referred to, shows it. It's everyone's responsibility, and from the bottom to the top, or from top to bottom, that it is key that everyone works together to ensure that we receive value for money. I think there's an issue in the King Code as well. What I do indicate is we do embrace all the King Codes, but now again we received that the newest one fully replaces the other one. So we do embrace King 4 as well. As internal audit, we haven't done our assessment on King 4 yet. The last assessment was done for the 24-25 financially on King 4 implementation and how far we are. We use it as guidance. It's not adopted as policy by council, but it is embedded, and I think moving the King 4 will be much more, the King 5, which much more nicer to implement, because it reduced the code. I know there's no supplement for municipalities anymore, but it reduced the number of principles. Previously we had 17 principles on the King 4, which only 16 is applicable to municipalities at that stage. We now have 13 principles, and ethics is still at the heart of it. Ethics and even your assurance function, your risk, your governance, your IT, those kind of issues. From our side, we do embrace and understand that it is there, and we table it and take note of it. However, we still need to do that assessment from our side to ensure that the practices are in place from assurance point of view, and saying that this is the guidance, best practice internationally. We are, and these are the recommendations to further implement terms of that. But from my side, I think, Zani, we can leverage and learn from each other, focusing on the key areas that's already embedded within a lot of our processes and just taking it forward. But the main challenge remains the practicality of implementation of these frameworks, which you should take on in a stage-by-stage approach, starting with proper planning in instance. Thanks, Ilani.
Thanks, JP. And again, for availing yourself and looking at the comments in terms of our attendees, how appreciative and also how insightful the session has been. We also appreciate those comments, because it also shows that we are not just having these conversations for the sake of having them, but more aligning and maintaining the knowledge exchange that we've always rooted the webinars on. But beyond that, it's also drawing from each other and learning from each other on how best we can make our municipalities better. Mr. Olemi, your closing remarks, and as you do so, we appreciate the partnership, the collaboration. Without it, possibly we will not be having these conversations. Let me allow you just your closing comments and remarks. Over to you.
Yeah, I think from my side is, and thank you very much for all the contributions. I just saw one in the comment that talks about, ESG, the environmental sustainability and governance, imperative within municipalities. I think that is also another key area that we must not lose, sight of. In fact, we must now be using that one as a guide, because sustainability, as well as making sure that the environment that we are under is also protected, but the sustainability and governance become a crucial issue. But I just want to twist or turn the wheels even more. Often with how we have our government structures, whether it's from a national, provincial, local, or national, as well as counties, or just government as one block. I think in our case, where at least we see a lot of devolution, because already local government in a South African context and most of the Southern African contexts speak to devolution, because you have a specific sphere of government. What we ought to be looking at is the whole issue of infrastructure. I opened with a slide, that was showing, for instance, how we need to be moving from underdevelopment into full development. So the whole issue of infrastructure development is another issue that must be conceived and located properly within the municipalities. And this is where municipalities ought to be looking at the likes of, Infrastructure South Africa, the likes of, the DBSA, the likes of, also linking up, with the National Treasury to bring into essence, the agenda of local infrastructure development, because that's a crucial issue going forward. Because if we don't have infrastructure, we're not able to have the roads that we're going to travel on to facilitate commerce and economic development. We're not going to have the new townships that are going to be developing and new investors coming into the particular area. We're not going to have revenue, because assets are the ones that generate the revenue from there. So I just want to emphasize that point, that as we are talking about the structures of government, we need to go back and agitate within our local municipalities that the 1 trillion amount of budget that is being set aside, or put forward for infrastructure development, how does it become a reality within the local municipalities? Number two, we spoke, I think, on the digitalization of municipalities. That is an urgent agenda, because as soon as you are digitizing processes, you are putting in systems, you are in effect starting to differentiate yourself as a municipality. You are able to do more than you could do if you have at least systems that are put together properly, aligning with the processes and feeding information. So those are the three key areas of ESG, because municipalities must be sustainable, infrastructure is crucial, and the transformation digitally of municipalities as well becomes crucial, because then council can work, or municipalities can work in a transparent manner, which is something that the citizenry are desiring to have. Transparency across municipalities, it becomes easier to pick up anomalies. It becomes easier to pick up areas where there are challenges, or areas where there's corruption, or to at least pick up risks that are forthcoming or that have materialized. But otherwise, thank you so much for this webinar, and we hope that the whole issue of devolution, as we continue with it, at least we can understand it to the point where even local municipalities can be able to participate within the bond market, as cities are allowed to participate within there to raise revenue. So those would be the further aspects that would need to be looked at in terms of the financial means of matching functions, powers, as well as the financial resources and human resources to complete the integration thereof. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mhlakazwam, and also thanks, Dan, my brother, for that appreciation. Sylvia, your closing remarks based on the conversations that I'll say were progressive this morning, but also opening up the space for future engagements, because we've got a lot to learn from each other. And as you might have picked from the chat as well, in terms of how informative this session has been for our audience, it then says, let's continue this revolution to ensure that we continue exchanging these ideas, the knowledge, but beyond that, building better institutions. Your closing remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Zolani. Mine is just to say I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this wonderful discourse. I do appreciate that majority of the audience was South African, so I've also learned a lot from the experience sharing and the aspect of leveraging on digital platforms to improve on service delivery. I had a lot on transparency and accountability, and I think for Kenya, we're trying to head in the right direction, especially with our robust safeguarding of public participation and ensuring we always have our citizenry's buy-in. We're also headed in the right direction in terms of really focusing on planning and making it mandatory for us to tap into resources. We could improve as Kenyans and learn from yourselves on strengthening of governance structures for effective service delivery. And I think we need to embrace more of collaboration between all levels of government. Those are my few remarks. I did more of learning than sharing. So I want to thank you so much, and thank you to our participants and their amazing comments. I appreciate this.
It's great that you also learned because as we were having the conversation and discussion, it was also one of your areas to say more than your contribution. You also want to draw from experiences. We are grateful for that. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are still with us, we appreciate the fact that you've been with us since we started the webinar. And again, for your certificates, the email address has been communicated. It will also be included in the communication that you will be receiving with this recording. As we do so, again, a reminder, 24th of April, we've got our first webinar on the 2026 white paper on local government. And I reserved this part for last because our lead panelist will be our Deputy Minister for the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dr. Masemola. It's a session that you don't want to miss, especially if you were able to join the webinar we had with him in 2025. As I close, let me appreciate once more the support and sponsorship we receive from Business Engineering and DSO Consulting Group. Without support, we will not be able to deliver these webinars at no cost to our audience. Let's continue ensuring that we collaborate and partner in making our local government better. To our supporters and partners in SIGFARO, SALGA, SINEM, ILGM, and IMSA, we always appreciate your contributions, your support in ensuring that we drive this revolution together. In what we do, there are many areas of convergence which will make our local government a better one. To all the attendees, from private sector, national, provincial, and local government, civil society. We've got academia, normal citizens who joined us. Let's keep going. This is the only way we will be able to actually change the trajectory of our local government. And once more, Dan and Tim, thanks, my brother. Without you, as I've indicated, we will not be having these conversations. Your contribution is forever appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Let's meet at 2 o'clock next week on Friday as we begin the conversations on the white paper on local government. And goodbye.